Welcome. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jürgen Onutzer. I chair the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences here at UW Medicine. I also direct the Garvey Institute for Brain Health Solutions. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome all of you to the first annual meeting of the Institute. We have a beautiful sunny day. There's more than 100 of us together in this virtual meeting, and we had prepared a wonderful in-person meeting. And I want to just say our staff had done a great job preparing a really awesome in-person get-together so we can see each other, we can smile at each other, we can share, and now we're still doing it on Zoom, and I'm sorry about that. But I think we still have a great meeting planned, and we didn't want to put it off any longer. I think it's important that we get a chance to start talking about some of this really important work that you all are doing and that we're doing together. So before I start today, before I get us started, I have the pleasure of introducing Dean Ramsey. Dr. Ramsey is the Dean of the School of Medicine and the CEO of UW Medicine, and he had a very big and very important role in making this new institute a reality. So I want to thank Paul and ask him to say a few words to welcome you all today.
Thank you, Jürgen. Good morning to everyone and welcome, and thank you for joining the first annual meeting of the Garvey Institute for Brain Health Solutions. It is truly a pleasure for me to join you for this first meeting. I would like to begin by saying some thank yous. We would not be here today. UW Medicine would not have the ability to address brain health conditions by providing solutions without the generosity, the support, the vision of Mike and Lynn Garvey and the Garvey family. Mike and Lynn, you are an inspiration to me, I believe to Jürgen, and to all of us in the health professions. Your interest in finding ways where you can make a difference, it's really inspirational. You're providing us the ability to be innovative as we approach brain health solutions. I could not be more appreciative of your generosity, your leadership, and your support. So thank you very much. Also, of course, I would like to say thank you to Jürgen and to all the faculty, staff, students, and trainees who are committing your wisdom, your professional expertise, your time to the research and the learning programs that will result in solutions for improving brain health. So thank you to everyone involved at this point with the Garvey Institute. Your work is going to make a difference. The final point I'd like to make today is why this is so important. Why has the generous support of the Garveys been so important? Why is the vision so important? UW Medicine has a single mission. We are a clinical research and learning health system. That means we focus on excellence in our clinical research and learning activities. We use those activities and we strive for integrated excellence with those activities to advance a single mission of improving the health of the public. What does improving the health of the public means? What does it mean? It really means that we are focused on improving health for all people. In our clinical programs, for those we serve with our clinical services, with our research and our learning programs, that's where we can have the global impact on improving health for all people. To succeed with this mission, we need excellence in our clinical research and learning programs. We need to integrate those programs, but we especially need to focus our efforts in the areas that are adversely impacting human health. We're fortunate to have the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation based in UW Medicine, and the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation gives us quantitative information about what is adversely impacting human health. Fortunately, in UW Medicine, we have excellence in cardiovascular research, care, and educational programs, and cardiovascular health is very important. Cancer is a very important area for us to address because of the tremendous adverse impact that cancer has on human health. But cardiovascular health and cancer are number 2 and 3 on the list of what is adversely impacting human health. Brain health is number 1. Thus, the research and the focus on implementing that research, accelerating the application of the research to identify solutions for brain health, it's really critical to our mission. So if you ask me the question, why is the Garvey Institute for Brain Health Solutions important to UW Medicine? What is the impact of the Garvey Institute? Well, I would say the answer is straightforward. The Garvey Institute is mission critical. We cannot advance our mission to improve health for all people without the work that you're doing in research and applying that research to improve brain health. So thank you, Mike and Lynn. Thank you to the entire Garvey family. Thank you to all of the leaders who are involved now in the Garvey Institute. And I really look forward to your efforts and the success of your efforts to improve brain health over the coming years. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Paul, for this really great welcome, and thank you for all your support of this important work. And now it gives me great pleasure to welcome and thank again Lynn and Mike Garvey. Mike and Lynn have made this institute possible with their amazing foundational gift, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit here. And they're both here with us today. I don't know if you can see them on the camera. They're both here with us. It's not an in-person meeting. We have one exception, and that's we have Mike and Lynn here with us today. And I appreciate that. And I want to say welcome and thank you to them. And nice to see you guys. All right. Okay, now I'm going to see if I can get us going here. All right, this is what we're going to try to do today. We're going to do some welcomes, and then I'll do a brief introduction to the Institute and what it is today. And then we'll get started to thinking about what could it be in the future. We'll spend the first hour, roughly the first hour doing that. And then we'll have an hour where we're going to do 4 featured presentations. There's a lot of good work that's happening in the Institute, and we won't have an opportunity to profile every one of the 24 projects that we've kicked off to date, but we're going to hear about 4 of them. We're going to have 4 teams sharing some of what they're working on right now, just so you have a bit more of a sense of what are we really doing as we get out of the gates with this new institute. Then we're going to take a little break, and then some of you are going to come back and join us for some more interactive breakout working sessions. We'll have 5 sessions working on a couple of sort of more nuts and bolts things related to the work of the Institute. And those of you who are participating in those sessions will have been sent a separate Zoom link. So that's the big picture for what we're trying to do. Now, let me start with a bit more welcome and some thanks, and then I'll do a bit of an overview of what the Institute is. We'll do a little bit of a history. I'll give a brief overview of the 24 innovation projects that we've launched in the first year and a half of the Institute since we've got this wonderful gift. And then we're going to do a little look ahead as to where we want to go and where we can go and where we might go. So we've done a wonderful welcome from Dean Ramsey, and we've said hello to Mike and Lynn, who are here with us today. And I also want to acknowledge and thank our Community Advisory Board members who are here with us on Zoom today, and who are going to be meeting with me after this session to put our heads together to see what we all have heard, what we've learned. And I value and appreciate their interest, their participation, and their contributions. And I'll just call them out. They're on the slide here. It's Craig Cole and Joe Whittinghill and Rita Agrari and Ken Warzel. And we are so appreciative of your interest in this work and your advice as members of our Community Advisory Board. I also want to thank everybody on the team who is making today possible, but more importantly, who's making the work of this institute possible on a day-to-day basis. And so I put many of you on the slide. It's probably not complete. So there's the team here, Semhar and Mary and Becky and Andy and Mike Walker, who are helping us with putting this event on today. And then I want to thank our presenters today, who you'll meet in the 10 o'clock hour. We have Drs. Pravatoni and Cheng and Kopelovich and Benzeev, Dr. Hendrickson and Dr. Sackett, and then Dr. Iliff. And we're going to hear from them and about their work that's supported by the Institute a little bit later this morning. And then finally, I want to thank our breakout facilitators. When we get into our working groups, a whole bunch of you are going to help us think about what are we doing, how can we do more, and what other ideas do we have that we could get traction on over the next couple of years. So I want to thank everybody who is helping us with our working groups later this morning. So what is the Garvey Institute for Brain Health Solutions? So when we set out to do this, what we said is, what do we do to put together the best minds in the Pacific Northwest to do three things: to improve the lives of individuals and families who are living with brain health and mental health problems today. And then to look ahead and say, what do we do to discover better treatments, better solutions for people tomorrow? And then the third part is, how do we inspire the next generation of scientists and healthcare professionals who are caring for our families and who will be caring for our families? And that's really the threefold mission of UW Medicine, which is what I say to our trainees that we try to bring here is I say, you're going to see people provide the best care we can today. And you might be doing that down the hall from somebody who's spending most of their energy thinking about what's going to be the better treatment tomorrow. And when you're learning in that kind of an environment, it gives us the opportunity to bring some of the best and brightest students here, because they'll know that they're not only learning the best that we can do today, but they'll also be in an environment where they might get a glimpse of what might they be doing with patients and families 10 years from now. And I think that if we do that well, we have a tremendous opportunity here to make a difference. So before I go on, I'm going to just take a couple minutes to sort of build a little bit more on what Dean Ramsey said about the importance of brain and brain health. So we're all, in different levels of knowledge about the brain, and I hope I don't offend anybody, but one of the things that we did when we started thinking about it is we all need to get good at making the argument, because we're competing with lots of other things always, about why is it important for us to think about the brain. So what is the brain? This is brain 101, really, like a minute. So our brain weighs about 3 pounds. It's made out of 75% of water. But that 3-pound organ uses 20% of your body's energy. So it's a very energy intensive part of your body. And what's inside that 3-pound thing? There's about 100 billion nerve cells, neurons. There's 100 billion little support cells called glia. And all those cells make more than 100 trillion connections. So this is an incredibly complex machine, an incredibly complex circuitry. And that circuitry is, for the most part, established by the time you're born, but it gets pretty actively modified throughout your mid-20s and even in later life. So understanding what happens in that machine gets us a long way to sort of saying, when things go wrong, how could we help? Now, what does that machine do? If you have a healthy brain, it does a lot of really amazing things. It processes all the information that it surrounds us. It's really what makes us human. It creates consciousness. It creates human experiences. It creates our memories. It helps us solve problems. It controls our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors, the way we act, the way we speak. And it really shapes who we are as people. It shapes us as human beings. It shapes our personality. So this is a very, very clearly a very, very important part of our body. You know, what happens when things go wrong? Well, when things go wrong with that organ, we have things like autism and anxiety and addictions and depression and bipolar disorder and schizophrenia and traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and in later life, we can have dementia. As Paul said, what the folks at IHME are telling us is that that set of brain health, mental health conditions is the single largest driver of health-related disability in the world. It affects nearly half of the world's population at some point. And the one thing that's a little different, you know, from brain health conditions and mental health conditions from, say, for example, cancer or heart disease, is that these conditions come at us very, very early in life. So by the time we're 14 years old, half of those people who are ever going to have a brain disorder will have already presented with some symptoms. By the time we're 24 years old, 75% of the people who will have to live with a brain disorder will have presented. And so that's what makes this such a tremendously disabling problem. You know, whereas for most people who will have to deal with things like diabetes or heart disease or cancer, it comes later in life. So you might have had a pretty productive life and then it comes. But if something comes and really affects your brain early in life, you may be struggling with a disability for most of your life. And that's what causes this tremendous cumulative burden that's associated with brain health problems. And it's not only disability. Brain health and mental health problems are also big drivers of early mortality. In the US, for example, we now have a completed suicide about every 13 minutes. And somebody dies from a drug overdose about every 8 minutes. And people who live with serious mental health or brain health illnesses died 20 to 25 years earlier than other people. And they're not necessarily dying from things like suicide. They're dying from the fact that when you're living with such a serious brain illness, it's hard to have good brain health, but it's also hard to have good physical health. And they're at increased risk for all of the things that all of us die from. It just happens a lot earlier. This is also a huge driver of healthcare costs. We're estimating that about $1.5 trillion a year in the direct cost of taking care of people who have disabling brain health and mental health problems. And if you're an employer, you feel those costs in a different way. You know, when our employees are struggling, when we are as employees are struggling with, you know, serious mental health or addiction problems, we might not be at work. We might be so sick we can't make it. So then we're absentee, or we might be at work and everybody wishes we weren't at work. That's what's called presenteeism. You know, we've all had our presenteeism days, and as an employer, know what that's like. You'll see a lot of reduced productivity. There is a huge amount of staff turnover related to mental health and addiction problems. And if you're a government, you're seeing it in different ways, and we are now seeing that on our streets here in Seattle. You'll see people who are struggling with homelessness and petty crimes and things that you're at much higher risk for when you're living with a mental health or a brain health problem. So I think the bottom line is this is a tremendously common set of problems. You know, I may have a little bit of a biased perspective as a psychiatrist. I don't think there is a family that doesn't struggle with some sort of a brain health or mental health problem at some point in their life. And that's our challenge. That's also the opportunity for us to make a huge difference. And the sad thing with this set of disorder, and this is, I think, one of the ways in which it's really quite different from things like heart disease or cancer. More than half the people who live with mental health problems or addiction problems actually don't get any care or really don't get any effective care. So if we had to say, you know, that in the state of Washington, only about 4 out of 10 people who are living with cancer today will ever get to see somebody who knows anything about taking care of cancer in the next year. We'd find that totally unacceptable. But that is pretty much where we are with most of the common brain health and mental health problems. So lots of challenges, but also a tremendous opportunity for us to make a difference. Why do we do this at UW Medicine? So this is a point we had to make when we made the case to the Garveys about why put an institute like that at UW Medicine. And many of you know the things on this slide. We are a big global university. We've been rated by Reuters as one of the most innovative public universities, maybe the most innovative public university. We are a leading school of medicine. We have the #1 rated hospital in Washington. We have, and many of you are on this meeting here with us today, we have a very strong neuroscience research community here. We have strong and growing clinical programs in this area. We have some great training programs. We have the opportunity for some really great partnerships here with our partners locally. And we also have, I think, a unique and a very strong relationship with our local and state policymakers. And if we make use of all of these strengths, we have tremendous potential, over the next couple of years to really make a big impact on brain health and mental health. So say a little bit more about the Institute. So this is from the website, and I'd invite all of you to learn more about the Institute, looking at the website. The mission of the Institute really is to improve the health for the millions of people who are at risk for and affected by mental health, substance use, and other brain health disorders. And the vision we have together is to say, what can we do to prevent some of these terribly disabling brain disorders? And prevention probably starts at a very, very early age, maybe even before you're born. And we're doing some really innovative stuff actually in this area, focusing on perinatal brain health and mental health, but also all the way to the other end of the lifespan. When we start worrying about how do we keep our brains functioning, we now have, some of us have the opportunity, the fortune, the privilege to get into our 90s, into our hundreds. Some of us are living very long lives, and so we need our brain to keep functioning all the way, to that point. So a little bit of history. This effort started, for many of us about 5 years ago when we got together, a number of us who are together here today, a couple department chairs, Dr. Ramsey, and a couple of other senior leaders at UW Medicine got together for a really great 2-day planning retreat at a wonderful farm out in Falls City, Washington. And again, I need to thank Mike and Lynn for that, because it's their place that we actually met and hatched a plan for this. And it was in August 2017, and we put our heads together for 2 days offsite to sort of say, if we had something like this, what would it look like? What would we need? And developed a wonderful vision. And then in October 2019, we had this wonderful fortune when Mike and Lynn Garvey announced the founding gift for the Institute with a tremendous foundational gift of $50 million over a 5-year period. And so with that, we didn't waste a lot of time. Within a year, we launched the first round of innovation grants. And I'll say a bit more about that in just a minute. We focused on 4 areas of brain health because we knew we had a lot of traction there. We focused on people who live with addiction problems, we focused on brain trauma, and we focused on cognitive aging. And then within another year, we launched a second round of innovation grants. And that second round is focused on brain health and technology and all the ways that we can use technology to try to improve brain health. And then, we have been doing this work in the midst of a pandemic. And I would say in some ways it slowed us down, but in some ways we just use the opportunity to say, let's do some things we might have done a little bit later and get them launched now. This fall, we did a couple of other things. We established our community advisory board, and I want to thank all of our advisory board members. This is their first get-together meeting. So they're with us from the very get-go here. We completed our first faculty recruitment with support from the Garvey Institute, and you'll meet that faculty member in just a little bit here. We've launched 3 additional faculty recruitment searches, and we also launched a really neat little program called the Brain Health Science Writing Internship. And so I'm going to give a shout out to Becky Slodek, who helps administer the Institute, who is a communications expert, and her point has been, we can do all kinds of good work, but we also need to teach each other, ourselves, and everybody who works with us, how do we communicate about the importance of brain health, and how do we talk about this, and how do we write about it? And so we are starting an internship where we're working with undergraduate students and other students to help them actually be good communicators about brain health. So those are some of the highlights of work that we've done in the last year and a half, trying to get this off the ground. The other thing I want to say is there are a lot of wonderful faculty who are participating in this work. Some of you are participating as advisors. Some of you have helped us with selecting the sort of the very best ideas for some of our innovation grants. Some of you are investigators on some of this early work. I'm probably not 100% inclusive here, and I'm sorry if I missed somebody. I want to thank everybody, all of our faculty experts and advisors who've helped us get this work started. We've organized that a little bit here on this slide in terms of the major areas of work that we've kicked off. And again, it's been super helpful to benefit from all that collective wisdom that we have here in helping us think about what really are the best opportunities for us to get some traction fairly early on. I'm going to say just a couple words about each of the 4 major areas that we've worked on so far. So as I mentioned, one of those areas is the idea of what happens to our brains as we get older. How do we look at this notion of cognitive aging and keeping our brains well? So one thing we do know is if we did everything we already know today about preventing dementia, we could probably prevent about 30% of all cases of dementia that people are struggling with living with today. And while 30%, you might say, what about the other 70%? I would say if we made that 30% leap, it would have a massive population health impact. And a lot of these are things that we really already know. We just have to think about how do we make them happen? How do we implement them? What would we do, for example, if we wanted at a UW-Madison level, find a really smart, a very slick way to help give everybody who we work with a check, a brain wellness check that would help us identify individuals and populations who might be at risk and who might be really good candidates for an early prevention or intervention strategy. Many of the things that we know that can make a huge difference for brain health are things like physical activity, social activity, mental activity, exercise, getting the right kind of sleep. You'll hear a little bit from Jeff Iliff about his work about sleep and cognitive aging and brain wellness. And while we have a basic understanding of those things, now we have to sort of get down to the next level to say exactly what kind of exercise, what's the best way to do that? What would it look like if a doctor gave you a prescription for exercise? And that's actually one of the things we're going to talk about with our colleagues in our Sports Medicine Institute, who've pushed a really interesting idea called Exercise RX. And we'll have one of our work sessions, one of our breakout sessions later today is going to focus on that. What about people who have had challenges to their brain, but they're actually doing really well? What can we learn about resilience? Sometimes we get stuck studying just all the bad things that happen, all the pathology. What if we took a slightly different look at cognitive aging and we said, what about people who've had all kinds of challenges happen to their brain? They've done some things that are probably not so healthy for their brain, but they still are doing really well. Their brain seems to be functioning really well. They have, a high cognitive reserve. They may have some neuroplasticity, that helps them, in a sense, repair injuries to their brain. What are ways in which we can learn from people who have what look like resilient brains, and what is it that we can learn from doing that so we can have better preventive or intervention strategies? So that's broadly the set of questions we want to ask with this institute. The other area, the second area that we've started to tackle is the area of addictions. This is an enormous problem in our society today. And I mentioned, for example, that we have in the US today, and this has actually gotten worse during the time of the pandemic, we have a person dying from a drug overdose every 8 minutes in the United States right now. And this is an enormous challenge. We have here at UW-Medicine some real strengths. We have a very strong group of researchers that work together in a center called the NAPE Center. And their work is really about understanding the basic neuroscience of what actually happens in our brains that puts us at risk for having an addiction problem, or when we develop an addiction problem that makes it hard for people to move past that addiction problem. And our challenge will be here to say, when we have those kinds of understandings of what's going on in the brain, how do we turn that knowledge into some targeted treatments, into some new types of pharmacotherapies or psychotherapies? And one of the things you'll hear about is a very, very exciting, innovative idea about the notion of, could you develop a vaccine that prevents you from developing an opioid use disorder, or if you're struggling with an opioid use disorder, that actually helps you with that, or maybe a small molecule, a monoclonal antibody that would help you in the situation of struggling with drug addiction. And you're going to hear a little bit about some of those ideas from Dr. Pravatoni a little bit later. We're also going to hear about some other novel therapeutic approaches. There's a lot of interest right now in the notion of, could one use drugs that we know have a very powerful impact on the brain, some of the psychedelic substances, for example, combined with psychotherapy to help people who are struggling with drug addiction. That's some of the work you'll hear about also. And then finally, for the people who are struggling with drug addiction, what are all the ways that we have learned that we should get out and get used more about people who are struggling with addictive disorder? How can you reduce the harm that comes from those conditions? So that's the set of challenges that we're really taking on in this area. In the area of trauma, we have both physical trauma that can have a tremendous impact on our brains, and also emotional trauma. And sometimes it's very hard to sort of disentangle the physical and the emotional. And I think that's important, actually. And just like with cognitive aging, what we really want to understand in this work is what makes us resilient to both physical and emotional trauma. What helps us with recovery for people who've had traumatic brain injuries, who are struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder. Very concretely, one of the goals we have is could we have a clinic that really focuses on the neuropsychiatric complications that happen to somebody who's had a serious traumatic brain injury? I think we have a gap there, and I think that's a gap we could fill with work in this institute. Could we find ways to actually do brain repair, for people who've had traumatic injuries? And then finally, as I mentioned, we're in a tech city. We're in a high-tech city here. We're in a digital tech city. There are a myriad of ways in which I think we could think about using technology to try to improve mental health and brain health. So this is the fourth area that we focused on so far. And a whole series of our innovation grants that we've funded so far are really focusing on innovative uses of technology to try to improve access to care, but also the effectiveness of the care that we are providing. One of the searches we're doing in this area, one of the faculty searches in this area is, it will be supported by a Garvey Institute endowed professorship in mental health and technology. And The primary focus for this first recruitment will be for somebody who is interested in a set of treatments called neuromodulation treatments. So these are things like all manner of ways of stimulating the brain that can be magnetic, that can be electrical, and there's a whole bunch of really exciting technologies, some of them already in use, some of them in a more early developmental state, but I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for us to partner with our colleagues here in neurology and neurosurgery who also have an interest in these kinds of therapies and say, what can we do to build in this area? So this was just a very brief overview of sort of the 4 main content areas of focus so far. There are a couple of other things that are sort of bubbling up. I would say these are some other really big ideas that we might take on as an institute. We haven't made any huge commitments in this area, but I'll just call them out, and there's probably room for plenty of others, and we are always open to people bringing us additional ideas. But I think there's a lot of interesting work emerging in the area of the brain and the immune system, the concept of neuroinflammation. How does it affect our brain health? How could we modulate that? That's an area we could get more engaged with. There is a tremendous amount of interesting work on the connection between your brain and your gut, and not necessarily just your gut, but all the trillions of little little bacteria and microbes that are living in your gut. The thing that we now refer to as the microbiome. We had a wonderful joint grand rounds presentation between the Department of Medicine and the Department of Psychiatry earlier this month, thinking about how does the microbiome affect your brain. And it's a two-way effect very clearly. And what is it that we could do, that we could learn about that, and how could we actually develop interventions in this area? Other opportunities, I think we have expertise here of people who really have a sophisticated understanding of how light and the way we perceive light affects our mental health. And that goes well beyond what we all know a little bit about here in the Pacific Northwest, which is the concept of seasonal affective disorder. I think we could push well beyond the current state of knowledge and say, are there opportunities to really develop smart interventions? And I already mentioned 2 other areas. One of them is neuromodulation, the notion of direct brain stimulation, and other novel therapeutics for addiction. So these are all some other ideas that we've started to give some thought to, and we are totally open as we develop this over the next decade or so to think about other smart concepts. Let me say a few things about the work that's been kicked off so far. So I mentioned that very early on, right out of the gate, we wanted to get some work going, and we actually have 24 innovation grants that the Institute has funded that are on the way right now. And what we said is when we solicited proposals for these innovation grants, we said this needs to be new ideas that can have a huge impact on brain health. They could be in the area of research. They could also be in the area of education or clinical care or patient care, or even maybe advocacy. They should help advance the Institute's goals to improve brain health at a population level. They should be the kind of ideas that we could pretty rapidly translate into actual clinical care and services. And they need to serve as a proof of concept that should be able to lead to additional funding. So, and each of these projects, most of them are funded at a level of about $100,000. So that's not going to help answer all the questions, but I think it should be sufficient to get, to get some proof of concept data that could then really lead to additional funding. And I think we're actually seeing that idea playing out pretty well so far. Okay. So it's very hard to summarize in 3 or 4 minutes what all the people are doing with 24 innovation projects. So I'm just going to do a very high level summary here. We have 24 of these projects underway, supported by the Institute, and the work is being done by more than 70 investigators, and those investigators are coming from all 3 UW campuses. We have folks here in Seattle working on these projects. We have also projects at UW Bothell and UW Tacoma. It covers collaborations across 9 of the UW schools and colleges, 20 departments, including many of the departments in the School of Medicine, but it goes well beyond the School of Medicine. And the work is being done in collaboration with really numerous local and regional partners. And I'm not going to be able to sort of go into the detail about everything. I have 2 things on this slide. On the left side, we made a list of some of the common problems that these projects are taking on. And I'll just let you take a minute and look at that on your own. And on the right side is a bit more of a word cloud. And that word cloud is pulled out of the proposals, some of the key ideas, some of the key techniques people are using to try to get at these problems. And I think it just will give you the sense that this is a pretty comprehensive run at a whole set of very common, very disabling brain health and mental health and addiction problems. This is just a picture of some, not all, but some of the many wonderful people, and many of you are on here with us today that are doing all this great work. And it surely wouldn't be possible without your energy, your enthusiasm, your ideas. And without what I see you do is you're connecting dots that haven't been connected before. And I think that's the opportunity we have here. We have a lot of smart people in this organization and in this town. And my hope is with these project and with the Institute, we can help connect some of these dots and get you together and put together teams that we haven't had before that can really do some pretty amazing work here over the next couple of years. So I want to thank all of you for that. If you'd like to learn more about any one of these innovation grants, there is a little bit more of a description. Every one of these projects has a more detailed description on the Garvey Institute website. This is a picture of the website. I invite you to look at that, to look at the projects that we currently have ongoing, and you can learn a little bit more about each one of them that way. So if I look at a year in, I would say we're seeing this idea of innovation grants probably was a really good idea. We are seeing a whole bunch of early successes. I see people have developed new collaborations, not just within UW and across the various UW entities. I see people collaborating with public organizations, with private organizations to do this work. We are already seeing some patients getting treatment through clinical trials and some pilot programs, and that's neat to see. I see providers and caregivers getting education and support. We've had a whole bunch of really nice news stories, and I think those do help with making people aware of the fact that it's important to do this work. We've had people do scientific presentations at meetings and conferences. We've already have a whole bunch of publications in scientific journals. And those are important because I think that those are what many of our investigators need, especially our young investigators, to justify getting further funding. And then I think people have gotten very good, and people are being very good about leveraging these initial investments that we've made, these $100,000 investments, to get additional funding. So we have seen several of the currently funded pilot projects getting additional funding from public agencies, from federal grants. So for example, Jeff Iliff and his team got a wonderful $4.5 million grant from the Department of Defense for some of their work on sleep, and you'll hear a little bit more about that work in just a bit. But also from our state government, and I'll say a little bit more about those collaborations in just a moment. These are just a few of the news stories, media stories that have come out of some of these innovation grants, local media coverage, some national media coverage. And it's always really neat to see that. And I think it is a very important way for us, in addition to writing scientific papers, to get this information out where people can see it and where people can engage with it. I said a little bit about faculty recruitment. So I'm going to use this slide to introduce, and you'll meet him in just a few minutes, our first faculty recruit into the Institute, and that's Dr. Marco Provatoni. Marco is a pharmacologist He is going to have an appointment in the Department of Psychiatry here. In fact, that appointment started not even a month ago. He joined us here from the University of Minnesota on January 3rd. His laboratory is in the newly reconstructed R&T building at Harborview. And he does some really fascinating work, as I mentioned, developing vaccines for people who struggle with opioid use disorders. And the Seattle Times ran a really nice front page article on January 5th, 2 days after Marco joined us here in Seattle, and you'll hear a little bit more from him in just a few minutes. We have several other active faculty searches. We are doing, as I mentioned, a search for a senior faculty member who can help advance the work on technology in brain health, and that initial recruitment focuses on somebody who's a real expert in the area of neuromodulation, brain stimulation. We have a similar recruitment, and we have a wonderful search committee that's helping us with the recruitment in the area of addictions, and we're doing 2 recruitments actually for faculty to join us to work in the area of cognitive aging. I mentioned that much of this work is in partnership, and I think one of the strengths of UW and the environment we have here in Seattle is we have an enormous amount of potential for smart partnerships, both with existing programs inside UW and UW Medicine, but also partners in our community. And I'm not going to I'll talk about every single one of them here. There are others that I probably don't have on this slide, and we're always looking for people bringing us a good idea for a new potential partner. I will mention one example of a partnership, and that's the one at the very bottom here. That's a new effort that we have going called the Weill NeuroHub. This was a wonderful effort that is also supported by a large philanthropic gift. Sandy and Joan Weill gave this wonderful $106 million gift. This was shortly after we announced the Garvey Institute funding that will support researchers from 3 universities, UCSF, UC Berkeley, and here at UW in working together to find new treatments for brain diseases. And I'll say a little bit about how this how this fits with what we're doing with the Garvey Institute. But what I'll say is this started actually as an effort that brought together UCSF and UC Berkeley scientists. And I think with the strength we have here now at UW, because of the new Garvey Institute, we were able to join this partnership. And we're now an equal partner in this 3-university partnership that brings us together and supports our scientists to try to do neuroscience. So how do these 2 things relate to each other? Much of the work that the Weill NeuroHub focuses on is very, very foundational, basic preclinical research. It's really about understanding the normal biology and the biology that happens when we have brain health problems. It's very basic science. And what we hope to do is to take some of the work, some of the lessons that come from that understanding of normal biology, to apply it and to say, how do we turn that into treatments? How do we do clinical and population science research? And ultimately, how do we take those treatments and put them out in the community where they can actually benefit people? So the way we look at this is the Weill NeuroHub is really funding on the basic foundational science work. And the Garvey Institute, we're focusing a bit more on clinical applications of that basic science, translating them into treatments and ultimately into changes in our community. So these 2 things are actually very nicely complementary. I'm going to wrap up here and just sort of, I've talked a little bit about what we've done so far, and now I'm going to take a few minutes to just look ahead. So I think that one of the challenges we have not solved yet, and one of the things we have a need for, and we are actively looking at what are all the opportunities we have here at UW to address that need, is we really would like some shared space for this institute. We are all doing this work in our current spaces, but we're all over the place. it's a virtual institute right now. And given that it's a virtual institute, I would say doing 24 projects and doing a whole bunch of good work, that's nothing to sneeze at. But it really would be great for us to have a place where we can have an innovation clinic, a really great place where we can have our researchers come together and do clinical trials, where we can provide, as the Garvey Institute, the kind of support you need to do really good clinical trials in brain health and mental health. And then ultimately, when we find treatments, when we found something in a clinical research study that really works, providing the support that people need to train others in how to do this work, because publishing it in a journal is good for us academically, but it's not going to help a person who's struggling with something. So we really need to take that final step, is to say, what is it when a researcher has found something that really works and it gets published? What do we do? And we have experience with this, so we know we can do this. How do we actually get this out into the entire community here in the Pacific Northwest? The other things that we have on the docket that we are working on and that we want to realize as part of the Institute is some really great training programs. So we have a wonderful discussion ongoing, and we'll have a workshop actually later this morning about what do we do to build training programs for clinicians and researchers that really are at an interface. So for example, there are a lot of people who are in our medical school or even before medical school who have started to realize that brain is really important, brain health is really important. They might say, what should I do? Should I become a neurologist? Should I become a psychiatrist? Should I become a neurosurgeon? And one of my thoughts is maybe we can say, we can put together here at UW Medicine a wonderful internship year, a brain health internship year, where somebody doesn't have to commit in their first year. Somebody goes through an experience where every single rotation they do in their first clinical year is something that's relevant to brain health. And then we say, some of us will go on to train in psychiatry and focus on brain health that way. Some of us will go on in neurology, and some of us will go on and maybe go to neurosurgery or another related field, maybe rehab medicine, or maybe GI if you're interested in the microbiome and brain health. And then at the tail end of residency training, we are working on putting together a one-year fellowship in behavioral neurology and neuropsychiatry. So this is person who's already trained in neurology or psychiatry, and they're going to do a year. And what we'd like to see is each year have one fellow from psychiatry and one fellow from neurology to work together to say, how do we do this work at an interface? Those are some efforts that we've kicked off, and we're going to have a session on it a little bit later this morning. And I think it could also make a real great difference in terms of the pipeline. We're also exploring what are new areas of research. I've mentioned a few of them, and we are totally open to other thoughts and ideas about that. And what are new partnerships that we haven't really pursued yet, but we now have the opportunity to do because we have this tremendous resource of the Institute. I'm going to wrap up with a comment on how do we leverage this tremendous investment that the Garveys have given us, this tremendous gift. And I'm just going to give a couple of examples where I think this is already happening. And this is an example that's in the area of developing the next generation, training and workforce development. So I think because of some of the strengths we have now here at UW Medicine, we're really fortunate and have had this wonderful investment that the state is making by giving the university $234 million of state funding to build a brand new state-of-the-art behavioral health teaching facility on the UW Medicine Northwest campus. And that project has started. If you're working up at Northwest, you can drive by it and see it. It's coming out of the ground. And our hope is that in 2024, we'll open this wonderful brand new teaching facility on the Northwest campus. We've also had a wonderful opportunity when the county, King County, did a tremendous bond to fund some tremendous improvements at Harborview Medical Center. It earmarked about almost $100 million for a new 10-story building for a behavioral health institute at Harborview Medical Center. We've also had some other wonderful philanthropic gifts that have joined this existing effort that we have here. And some of you know about this, and some of you are working on this project. The Balmer Group made a wonderful investment, a $38 million gift, Steve and Connie Balmer, to the university to help with workforce development training. And we have a couple of really great projects that we're doing in partnership with that effort. And then I already mentioned the Wild NeuroHub gift, which funds basic neuroscience work at UCSF and UC Berkeley, and with more recently including also UW researchers. So I think this is just a couple of examples of when we have this kind of a critical mass of people and the kind of capacity that we now have, of ways in which we could really leverage that initial investment and make a huge difference, both in private and public partnerships. So we're right on time, and I'm going to wrap up this initial part here with a couple more really important thank yous. So let me start again with saying a huge thanks to Lynn and Mike Garvey, to Dean Ramsey, to Don Theophilus, who is our head of our advancement program, who was incredibly helpful in making this wonderful institute a reality, to our advisory board members, to all of our faculty advisors and investigators and the staff who work on all these great projects. This is a really remarkable opportunity for us to really make a big push ahead in brain health at this critical time. And I would say, given that we've done this work in the midst of a pandemic, we're off to a pretty good start, and we're growing. I think we are building a great team. I think we have done a good thing by inviting the best ideas to improve brain health and mental health. People brought forward some really exciting ideas. We got going on 24 of them. I think we're recruiting new collaborators to join the team. We're developing some new partnerships, and we are also looking to say, what's the next project and what do we need to do to invite new supporters, new sponsors for the next big idea that we can help support through this institute. So join us in these efforts to improve brain health at a population level. Many of you have already joined us. If you can think of others who want to join us, it's wonderful. Bring us new ideas, innovations, suggestions for partnerships that we haven't really explored yet. Ways for us to make a difference, and then also help us get the word out. Share the website. You're welcome to share any of this information or any of the slides. And the best way for you all to reach us, I put the email address for the Institute on this slide. So if you have thoughts today, tomorrow, or in the future, send us an email. It will not get lost. We are happy to hear from you. It's not possible, unfortunately, in this kind of Zoom environment here to get a heck of a lot of interaction with this group of more than 100 of you who are on here with us today. But I think you know how to find us. Reach out. Let us know if anything I said today stimulated you. If you have thoughts, if you have ideas. We're super happy to hear from you, and we're just excited to do all this great work together. So I think we're on time, and we're going to now shift gears a little bit. I'm going to stop talking at you, and we're going to turn to a couple of short 10-minute feature presentations of some of the work that's going on in the Institute. And what I've asked each of our presenters to do is they will share their slides. And they will give us very brief presentations, 6, 7, 8 minutes. And then if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We have the chat functionality here in Zoom. And if we have the time, we'll get to the questions right after each of these presentations. And if not, you're welcome to reach out to our presenters afterwards. And we'll hear from 4 great ideas, and then we'll have a couple minutes to wrap up here. So thank you all for sort of being with me for this initial overview. And now I'm going to stop my screen share. And I think, Marco, we're going to turn it to you, right? You get to introduce yourself and tell us about your work.
Yeah, hi, Jürgen. Thank you for the very nice introduction, and thank you, everybody. Nice to meet you. And thanks to the Garvey's family for being here. So today I'm just gonna give an overview of like our work and what the Garvey Institute Spark. So here I'm gonna share some of the work we are doing and some of the vision for the Center for Medication Development to support translation of new treatments in the area of substance use disorders and overdose. So as Jürgen mentioned, I just joined the faculty like a few weeks ago, and I'm excited to be here. So our goal is to tackle substance use disorders and overdose, which are an enormous problem in public health because of the complexity of the target population and disease, the limited approaches that are currently available. There are very few FDA treatments available, and that is matched with a limited pipeline for medication development. So substance use disorders, opioid use disorders, and drug overdose, they encompass a variety of clinical scenarios that are complicated by the availability of like so many different compounds. So if you think about heroin, prescription opioids, synthetic opioids like fentanyl, as well as stimulants, designer drugs, which are further complicated by polydrug use or street mixtures that contain often unknown compounds. So for instance, fentanyl, methamphetamine, they're all present in the pipeline, and that can lead to risk also for non-drug users. So instances of accidental or deliberate poisoning or overdosing. We know now, like, especially the last 2 years have been horrific. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated alarming statistics for substance use disorders and overdose, opioid use disorders. In the United States, there are about like 18 million people affected by substance use disorders, and only like 1 out of 5 receive treatment. So in the past year, statistics indicate that more than 100,000 people died of overdose, of which 75% involve an opioids. And here in the state of Washington, in the same period, there were roughly 1,900 overdose deaths. And we are looking at an overdose rate of 25% over 100,000 people. And if you think about it, like the overdose deaths are just the tip of the iceberg. Overdose deaths, if you're looking behind them, you are going to look at non-fatal overdoses that will require emergency hospitalization, lost productivity, damage to the families, and you have like this umbrella of issues that are affecting public health as well as our hospital system. So there are very few FDA approved medications which they are there, but they still have limitations that can affect their real life application. So for example, in the field of opioids, there are opioid receptor agonists and antagonists. You may have heard of methadone, buprenorphine, naloxone, naltrexone, and some of these, they either have side effects, suboptimal efficacy, or they have their own liability for abuse or diversion. And for targets such as methamphetamine, for instance, there are no FDA approved medications. So there is a lot of room like to do better. We need more candidate products in the pipeline, in both the preclinical and early clinical pipeline, that will create momentum for translation. But to do so, we need to build a foundation for discovery, development, and translation so that we can build this infrastructure for seeking more approval to the FDA and more testing, so conducting more clinical trials. And to do so, we really need like to emphasize the fact that this is not cancer, this is not allergy. So typical investors and pharma partners, they don't really invest in addiction medication. So in order to de-risk their investment and attract people like that will enable further translation and commercialization, we need to provide a clinical proof of concept that this type of medication could potentially work and have an effect. So what we've been doing for the past 10 years or so, our solution was to create our own momentum, if you will, so that we can really bridge the bench to bedside gap to move forward, advance novel intervention for substance use disorder and overdose. And our team, like my contribution in this space, has been to develop a pipeline for biologics, and then later on expand to small molecules, device, and other potential application. So what we do mostly in my laboratory is being to develop vaccines that target a variety of opioid. And this cartoon here, you can see how these things work. So vaccines and antibodies, they work essentially by binding and neutralizing the target drug so that the target drug doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier and doesn't reach the brain. Doing so will minimize side effects of opioids, for instance, like respiratory depression, bradycardia, as well as limit the euphoric effect. These vaccines and monoclonal antibodies are very selective, and so they can be combined with existing therapy. So this particular program has been conducted in the past 10 years. We gained enough traction that one of our vaccine is now in clinical trials. So we have now initiated a phase 1 clinical trial of a vaccine targeting oxycodone, hydrocodone, and related compounds. And now we have other 3 pending clinical trials for which we have NIH funding. Last week, we just submitted a pre-IND request to the FDA for a fentanyl vaccine. Other products in the pipeline are monoclonal antibodies that can be used to prevent or reduce or reverse toxicity and overdose, and could be potentially combined with Narcan. Our program is really rooted in the I wouldn't say the basic science, but in understanding the mechanism of how this vaccination antibody-based strategies and other approaches work so that we can enable discovery. And by studying the science of these treatments, we essentially identify new technologies that can advance either vaccines or antibodies, so things such as adjuvants, carriers, polymers, or now we are trying out like mRNA vaccines, since they seem to be working with COVID or other targets. But also, since we are chemists, or our team includes like chemists, we are also developing extended formulation of opioid antagonists. So think about if a Narcan type of medication could have an extended release to prevent re-narcotization, could have a bigger impact. Since we are still interested in also enabling medications and treatments, we are developing point-of-care devices. So, for example, an antibody-based biosensor that can be used to detect opioids in the field, and we're expanding that to other targets. In fact, vaccines and antibody-based therapies, they are actually a flexible platform that can be used to target other disease. So, for example, now we are expanding into vaccines and monoclonals for methamphetamine, as well as poison or chemical threats such as nerve agents, for instance, as well as this type of work enable collaboration with other colleagues that are developing either vaccines or monoclonals for COVID, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, cancer, and malaria. And so now that I'm plugged in the University of Washington system, this project will actually gain even more traction. So in essence, to do so, we had to create an end-to-end platform that goes like from discovery to clinical trial, so that we can enable the entire continuum of medication development. To do so, aside building our in-house capability, we had to reach out and develop the infrastructure for medication development that encompass multi-institution teams, industry partners, contractors, regulatory experts, clinical sites, business advisors, as well as folks that are interested in the marketing and reimbursement strategies to enable commercialization. So here, thanks to the Garvey Institute and the gift from the Garvey family, we are able to create momentum to start a center for medication development to advance brain solutions for substance use disorders and overdose. And the mission here is really to act as a catalyst for translation and commercialization of novel treatment strategies. So, for example, the idea here would be to build an ecosystem, just like the Garvey Institute and the larger network that Jürgen was describing, of scientists, physicians, stakeholders, entrepreneurs to foster innovation. And the idea here is that leveraging, whether it's philanthropy, government funding, public-private partnership, and private equity, to really build that kind of critical mass that is required for translating discoveries. And to do so, I already start like making a little bit of tracks on seeking strategic partnership here at the UW School of Medicine, as well as the Pacific Northwest. So we start talking with Commotion, with the School of Business to spark entrepreneurial activities. I start connecting with the School of Pharmacy, the Institute of Protein Design, so that I can find other folks that are actually, they do like formulation or antibody development, as well as we have ongoing collaboration with the Fred Hutch Cancer Center, and we're looking forward to actually start new collaboration with Seattle Children's, or trying to reach out to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or other local entities that will help us to accelerate our program. So for instance, venture capital firms or other for-profit entities that could potentially support spin-off and startups that will move some of this medication forward. And so the idea here is that the center and reaching out like to the larger community here, the idea will be that we're going to be investing in the present in center resources, as well as building for the future for sustainability. So the idea here is that we're going to spend time in building administrative core. So for example, things like a project manager, getting instruments, recruit talent, so that we can actually build the center, as well as start like new projects such as starting a biobank of clinical samples from substance use disorder patients to enable biomarker discovery, build on the phase 1 clinical trial capability that Jürgen was describing, as well as create the environment to train the next generation of scientists, physician, entrepreneurs that are interested in medication development. And finally, bridging to new areas. So for example, biologics now are being applied to neurodegenerative disease. People are developing vaccines for dementia, or we are thinking about targeting psychiatric meds toxicity. And that, like closing, before Jürgen cuts me off. So if you have any question about our program or what we intend to do, like really, we cover a variety of aspects of medication development, like some of here that are listed here on the screen. And so for this, I thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions, if any.
Yeah, Marco, thank you so much for this very brief sort of tour de force, this introduction to amazing work that you and your colleagues are doing. And thank you for joining us here at UW and at the Garvey Institute, and again for sharing some of this exciting work. We actually don't have time for questions, so I'm going to suggest that people who got inspired by what they heard from you this morning find a way to reach out, and I'm happy to facilitate that. But again, thank you so much. I'm going to switch gears now, and we're going to hear from a team that's helping individuals and families struggling with such diseases as schizophrenia. And I don't know who's leading off. Is Sarah leading off? Hi, Sarah.
I am. Good morning, everyone.
And I'll let you introduce the rest of your team as well.
Will do. So I'm Dr. Sarah Kopelovich. I'm going to be presenting along with Dr. Sunny Chang and Dr. Jorben Zev on digital health interventions for people with schizophrenia and their caregivers. And we're going to start off with a project called Psychosis iReach. I am the intervention team lead for Psychosis iReach. Dr. Chang is the design team lead for this intervention I'll be telling you about. And Dr. Dong Si in the STEM school is our development team lead. And I just wanted to share with you how extensive this interdisciplinary collaboration is. We have students, trainees, and professionals across 3 schools and 3 campuses at the University of Washington who are all collaborating on this effort. So we have quite a brain trust here. Schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders are considered among the most complex psychiatric conditions to treat. So even with optimal pharmacotherapeutics, roughly 60 to 80% will continue to experience distressing or disabling symptoms. And we know that families are on the front lines managing psychosis at home. They are the first responders. And 30 years of research indicates that when families receive services to help them manage and navigate life with psychosis, the family system is healthier, the family member with the psychotic disorder gets better, faster, and with less intensive interventions, and the system is able to deliver more effective whole person care. Unfortunately, we know from a comprehensive study that was spearheaded by the federal government that fewer than 2% of families navigating psychosis will receive any form of family intervention. So how do we increase access to critical evidence-based family interventions for psychosis? Well, we first addressed this issue through an intervention called Psychosis Reach, Recovery by Enabling Adult Carers at Home. This was co-developed by my colleagues and myself in UW Psychiatry, along with international experts at Stanford and from the United Kingdom, to really bring evidence-based psychosis management skills training direct to families, bypassing the challenges associated with clinic-based care. We started off, this was 2019, we had an 8-hour live training on the UW campus, and the results were impressive. We found sustained reductions in anxiety, depression, stigma, improved communication in the home, and families feeling more effective at managing difficult symptoms and behaviors at home. But we know that live trainings don't scale. Digital delivery is critical to equitable and effective scale-up of Psychosis Reach to the tens of millions prospective beneficiaries. And by our estimates, there are 60 million Americans who have loved ones who experience psychotic symptoms or a psychotic disorder. Through the Garvey Institute one-year innovation grant, we are employing a participatory, iterative, user-centered design process, so really centering families, to develop a Psychosis iReach, which is a digital platform that uses artificial intelligence, machine learning methods to deliver Psychosis Reach skills training to families and friends of those who are navigating life with psychosis. And our interviews with families have allowed us to customize the digital training platform to their needs and preferences. It takes into account their own emotional needs and at the same time builds their capabilities of promoting that recovery trajectory of the person that they are caring for, all in the context of a safe, comfortable, and on-demand platform. So by the end of this one-year grant period, we have about 7 minutes or so, or 7 months, excuse me, left on that clock. Our team will have developed an initial prototype of a product that will literally be in the homes and pockets of potentially tens of millions in America alone. Our next steps are to develop engaging features to humanize the chatbot interactions and enhance the authenticity. We'll then look for additional funding to refine and optimize the machine learning capabilities so that families can practice their own responses to simulated scenarios with loved ones and get real-time feedback on those responses. And our ultimate goal is that all families that need this can have access to expert-led interventions 24/7 to help them support and communicate with their loved ones. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Benzev to share his mobile intervention.
Thanks, Sarah. So I think you're on my slides, right? So I know that you're going to be taking in a lot of information, the audience, and sort of trying to drink from a fire hydrant today. So I'll try to keep my presentation about myself and about the intervention that we're doing very lean and targeted in terms of what I'm sharing with you. So my name is George Benzev. I'm a professor in the department, and I serve as the director of the BRIGHT Center. BRIGHT stands for Behavioral Research in Technology and Engineering. There's a lot of really good work in our department involving a range of groups that are using technology, that are thinking creatively about technology. Our center does a lot of work focused on smartphone interventions, mobile interventions, digital health broadly defined, with a particular emphasis on serious mental illness. And so that's kind of our bread and butter. And in the context of this work, we developed an approach called the mobile interventionist. It involves clinical texting, taking the clinical relationship between provider and patient out of the brick and mortar clinic and out into the real world where people function, have challenges, try to negotiate day-to-day life, because we know that the vast majority of our lives are spent outside of the clinic walls, certainly without the clinician in the session room. And so we're trying to expand the reach of this approach. And so I think Sarah gave a good overview about psychosis and the implications of that. This intervention, as we're currently deploying it with funding from the Garvey Institute, is focusing on early psychosis specifically. We know that that's a critical period in the trajectory of illness. We know that early interventions in that trajectory of illness can be tremendously useful, but we also know that young adults with early psychosis are a particularly challenging group to engage in sessions. The relationship with their symptoms, with their illness, even with the need for care, often serves as an obstacle to coming into the clinic and engaging in care. So let's switch over to the next slide. With all this in mind, we also know that young adults with early psychosis are avid users of mobile technology, just like the vast majority of the world. And so in 2017, the number of mobile phones worldwide exceeded the population. If you take a moment to think about that from a healthcare perspective, that is an enormous opportunity, right? To expand the reach and scope of what we do with our in-person care, well beyond the physical setting of a clinic, reaching people where they are and when they need us or resources the most. So those numbers and that penetration of mobile phones applies to people with early psychosis as well. Let's go on to the next slide briefly. And so we constructed this approach that involves training the clinicians who are working at clinics. In this case, we are expanding what we've done from research into real world practice, into implementation at the STEP program at Harborview that provides specialty care for young adults with early psychosis. And the way that this works, and if you can keep sort of pressing the slides there, Sarah, are once trained, and we've already completed that training with our clinicians, they will reach out to the patient and check in with them multiple times a day for brief, low intensity, but high frequency interactions with those with early psychosis. An example for that might be, "Hi, it's Sarah. How are you feeling, Ray?" And Ray responds to her by saying, "Hi, Sarah, the voices are talking about it." Voices being auditory hallucinations. Let's switch over. And that's a target that our interventionist is familiar with from their interactions with Ray. She's come into sessions. And so she reflects back and says, "That's stressful, but you're not alone." Normalizing the experience. Lots of people hear voices, trying to create a conversation about that. But Ray responds by saying something very specific. They're saying something, and we're paraphrasing on the actual text message. They say something bad is going to happen if I take the bus. And so Ray has just provided Sarah, the clinician, with a very concrete target for intervention, right? Let's go over to the next one. Here's when Sarah jumps into kind of concrete intervention mode. "I have a trick that can help you feel calm, even when voices are loud and on the bus. Do you want to hear about it?" And Ray responds with a semi-enthusiastic maybe. "What is it?" But that's the window of opportunity that we're looking for, right? It's that opportunity to engage in concrete skills training and relaxation strategies that then Ray will go on and try on the bus and gradually work through that distress and the hesitancy that serves as a blockade for engaging in life, right? Engaging in education, engaging in clinical services, engaging with her family members. So that's the gist of what we're trying to do. We've done a lot of research with NIH funding and other sources, testing out this model, refining and improving it. The objective here is to try to move it from research to practice. And of course, if this Garvey supported work proves to be useful and effective, then the vision is to try to create that type of approach, that training across New Journeys programs, across the state of Washington and beyond. New Journeys is these specialty early psychosis clinics that are specifically targeting services for the young adult population that are emerging both in our state and throughout the country. So it's a real opportunity. If we get this right here, we can really expand what we do and try to affect care nationally. All right, I'll stop here. Thanks for everyone's attention.
Thank you to Sarah and Sunny and Dror. We do have, I think, a minute or two if somebody wants to chat a question. I'm a lousy multitasker, so if somebody wants to take a look. We got a cute comment from Rick Reese. He wants to know if Sarah is the AI computer or if it's Sarah live. So that's the question.
Sarah is in fact live. So the idea here is that we are using the technology to facilitate the human connection between the interventionists and the patients, but very much a trained clinician, and that's a lot of the work that we're doing. Is how do we calibrate the intervention so that they can be delivered asynchronously by a real person and received by a real person.
Great. All right. So I appreciate you all being so good at being on time, so I don't have to be a bad guy here. This was a great introduction to a whole body of, I think, really important work, and that's not kind of crazy ideas. That's stuff you're now doing with patients at Harborview, and I really appreciate that. And I think it has a tremendous amount of potential. So thank you for sharing that with all of us this morning. Now I'm going to make another transition. I'm going to introduce another team here, Doctors Rebecca Hendrickson and Nathan Sackett. Rebecca, are you sharing your slides?
Yes, I think so. Can you see them?
Yep. Okay, I'm going to get out of your way. I'll let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the exciting work you're doing in the area of psychedelics in the treatment of trauma and addictions.
Thank you. So it is a real honor to talk to everyone today about the potential for psychedelics to provide a new avenue for the treatment of trauma and addiction. So as clinicians working in the fields of PTSD and addiction, Nathan and I regularly see patients like this fictionalized representative example. Tyler is a veteran with a history of childhood and adult trauma who experiences classic PTSD symptoms, such as intrusive memories, feeling constantly on edge, and recurring trauma nightmares. He frequently uses dangerous amounts of alcohol to try and escape these experiences. Over several years of working together, Tyler and I find a combination of medications that reduce his nightmares and dampen his daytime symptoms. He completes several forms of intensive psychotherapy and he achieves intermittent periods of sobriety, but he continues to have frequent periods of very high internal distress, feeling on edge, irritable, constantly expecting something terrible is going to happen, even when his life is outwardly looking on track. And he continues to have some of the frequent medical consequences of trauma, including high blood pressure and heart attack, which raises risk of a heart attack or a stroke. Now, I love my work in a PTSD specialty clinic, and I really believe that the treatments we provide help immensely. But folks like Tyler, who experience only partial relief, are not rare. For example, a study of veterans receiving one of our gold standard psychotherapy treatments found that fewer than 3/4 of patients even completed the treatment. And of those, only about half were under that threshold for active PTSD following treatment. Furthermore, even of that clear minority that finishes treatment and no longer meets criteria for PTSD at the end, studies have found a majority still experience significant and often impairing residual symptoms such as hypervigilance and insomnia. In terms of the inadequacy of our current options for the treatment of addiction, Dr. Pravatoni gave us a really powerful introduction to that. And I think the numbers also speak for themselves as we continue to experience heartbreaking rates of suffering and death. So how can we do better? You can think of trauma and addiction as both leading to a cascade of interacting changes in actions, thoughts, and physiology. Recent work in our group and others has particularly underscored the ability of trauma, especially trauma early in life, to cause persistent changes at the levels of the receptors and the stress response systems throughout your brain and your body. But when we try to address these changes using our current tools, medications can be just too coarse a tool for the very specific changes we're trying to address. And while psychotherapy often seems to leave some of these profound changes unaltered. Now, when I look at this, I see an overwhelming need to somehow combine the precision of psychotherapy with the power of medications to allow plasticity in systems that are keeping people's nervous systems stuck in a sort of never-ending fight or flight mode. In fact, it was this goal that brought me to a research career in PTSD. And it's this goal that leaves me really excited about the potential for psychedelics as a tool that can augment the power of psychotherapy and provide real relief for people like Tyler.
So one way we may be able to better help patients like Tyler is if we can pair psychedelics with psychotherapy. A study was recently conducted using mice, where they taught them a behavior and they measured their ability to learn as the animal ages, seen here in the gray dots. The ability to learn peaks in early life and then reduces as the animal ages, an experience we also see in humans. This is one reason that kids can learn languages or music at such a faster rate than us adults, because a younger brain is biologically more neuroplastic. As one ages, we lose some of this ability to learn. which is one reason it can be hard to treat things like PTSD and substance use in adults. Their brains are less able to adapt and learn these new behaviors. However, in this same study, researchers then gave older animals MDMA and retested their ability to learn, and found that MDMA dramatically improved learning despite age, as noted in the green dot. If these compounds can help reopen these critical learning periods in our patients, then we have a substantial opportunity to help our patients engage in treatments for trauma, for addiction, and probably a range of other indications. Imagine if we could use these compounds to help patients relearn or become more adaptable. Psychedelics may provide this opportunity. But we're not dealing with mice, as seen in the previous slide. We're dealing with the complexities of human behavior. So how does the use of various psychedelics and therapy affect substance use specifically? Well, there's a growing body of work on this, but I want to highlight two important pilot studies. First, at Johns Hopkins, a group conducted a pilot study using psilocybin in therapy for tobacco use disorder, and they found an 80% abstinence rate at 6 months, shown here with the first bar representing the average number of cigarettes per day at the start of the trial, compared to the second gray bar representing the number of cigarettes after 6 months. At NYU, a research group examined the use of psilocybin plus therapy for alcohol use disorder and found a 50% reduction at 3 months, seen here in the red and blue lines. Now, these are amazing outcomes not often seen in the world of addiction treatment, and these early trials have inspired a range of additional trials, but there's not yet a group focused explicitly on how psychedelics can be used to treat addiction, with clinical trials and research developed by addiction experts. We also see promising results when psychedelics like MDMA are combined with therapy to treat PTSD. In June 2021, Nature published the results of a multi-site phase 3 clinical trial where they treated one group with therapy alone and a second group that gave therapy and added 3 sessions of MDMA to see which would better treat the PTSD symptoms. The findings were striking. For participants who received MDMA and psychotherapy, at the end of the trial, 2/3 no longer met criteria for PTSD, seen here in red, compared to the therapy-only group who had a loss of diagnosis of 1/3, seen here in blue. This suggests that therapy is an important treatment, but when MDMA is added to the therapy, you see more than doubling the positive effects. This is just one most recent example of how psychedelics are being paired with psychotherapy and being used clinically with profound results and real-world impact. Given the promise of psychedelics in substance use and PTSD, we're in the process of developing a new research center at the university called the Center for Novel Therapeutics in Addiction Psychiatry. And thanks to the support of the Garvey Institute, we're hosting our first meeting in April with a range of experts, both regionally and nationally, to help shape this research program and try to raise more funds to move this work forward. The center's primary goal is to address how to match the right psychedelic with the right psychotherapy for the right patient. And we're combining multiple different research approaches, including basic research, clinical trials, and training and education. The center capitalizes on the vast regional expertise in addiction research, psychiatry, psychology, pharmacology, neuroscience, and education. And the center will promote important research from early exploratory work to studies on safety using animals, to clinical trials, to training and education in the community. Now, we're already starting to develop a clinical trial, which will act as a model for future clinical trials using ketamine and psychotherapy to treat tobacco use disorder. And we hope this pilot will begin in this summer.
Over at the VA, we're working to start a clinical trial of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD, which is what resulted in those incredibly promising initial results Nathan showed you just a minute ago. Our goal is to answer 3 big questions about this treatment. Who is it that benefits from this treatment as compared to existing options? Is it better than existing treatments at treating those particularly persistent symptoms like insomnia and those persistent physical sequelae like changes in cardiovascular functioning? And finally, once we started answering these 2 questions, how do we make it even better? To do this, we're starting with the existing protocol implemented in a different context and with a new set of assessment measures. As a subspecialty clinic working with a very high acuity and often treatment-resistant population, we'll be bringing this treatment to a particularly broad range of patients that, compared to where it's been tested so far, helping us identify who it is that benefits the most. We will also add detailed tests of sleep, autonomic, and cardiovascular functioning before and after the treatment to test whether it really is, as we hope, able to treat the symptoms our current interventions often leave unchanged, And I want to note the implementation and validation of the comprehensive physiologic battery we're using is actually being funded by a separate Garvey project looking at the changes in these same systems after COVID-19 infection. And we're really grateful the fruits of that work are already benefiting our research program broadly. Finally, we're profoundly fortunate to be doing this work in a team that includes expertise in developing and testing both medication and psychotherapy-based approaches to PTSD treatment. So as soon as we start to get answers about what's working and what's not in the treatment's current form, we can begin to iteratively update our intervention to make sure it's really addressing what patients like Tyler are telling us they most need. Now, there's a reason that this work, while incredibly exciting, is still pretty rare. Working with psychedelics has significant complex regulatory burden. Worse, there remains very limited government funding available for working with substances that have been so stigmatized. For example, the core of our MDMA project is so far being run unfunded, with the clinicians involved paying out of pocket for training just because we really believe in this project. Finally, the trials themselves are highly complex and require an experienced clinical trials infrastructure. These challenges require researchers to be somewhere with truly robust institutional support and with a core research community that includes psychiatrists, clinical trialists, and neuroscience expertise, which is why I believe that between the generosity of the Garvey Institute for Brain Health Solutions, the depth and support of the UW Medicine Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and beyond, and the decades of mental health clinical trials expertise of the VA's Northwest Myrick, we are really uniquely positioned to meet these challenges and start bringing the promise of this new approach to our community and especially to our patients. Thanks so much for listening, and we're happy to answer any questions, probably via the contact information on this slide since I used all our time.
Rebecca and Nathan, thank you so much for another great, very short, but really great focused tour of the amazing work you're doing. You know, this is an area that is controversial. I think it has tremendous, as you said, it has tremendous potential. And I think we don't have to be afraid to look at a challenging and potentially high-risk opportunity as long as we do it well. And I think the way you guys are going about it is smart, it's careful, it has a tremendous potential to make a difference. And I think it's great to have the support of the Institute to help you launch some of this work that has been very challenging to do with more traditional federal funding. So it's great to see that. I think we have a minute or two if somebody has a question in the chat. Maybe you guys can take a peek and see if you want to say anything.
I always put the contact info back up as I just said it was there and then hurriedly took it down. Let's see. Combining Lotus's psychedelics with transcranial magnetic stimulation. So I think we would be in a pretty good place to do that here, given our strength and expertise. I think we have to know what it looks like without that first. But there are so many directions that would be exciting to take this that I think we're gonna be in a good position to follow where the science takes us. Nathan, I don't know if I'm gonna add to that or if we should look at the other question.
No, that sounds great. And looking at the other question about complementary treatments plus such as therapy animals, I'm not aware of any trials that looked at that. Are you, Rebecca?
No, and we have looked at other types of meds in combination with psychotherapy. In fact, my original plan was to look at noradrenergic modulators in combination with psychotherapy. But a number of years ago, when I first saw the early results of the MDMA and therapy combinations, I was just blown away. It's unlike anything I have seen in other contexts. And so this specific direction wasn't where we started out, but it's where I feel like the data is pretty clearly leading us. But there probably are other things that will come up over time too.
Oh, very good. Thank you again, both of you, for this introduction to this work that you're doing. I think it has a tremendous amount of potential. It's a nice example of what I tried to say earlier is connecting the dots. I think, you know, if we get traction with this institute, the best way we'll do it is doing what we actually just have done with the two of you. To connect some dots and to use a whole bunch of complementary expertise. And there are others here who have relevant expertise to see what we can do. So thank you for introducing us to this work. So I'm going to make one more transition, and that's our last feature presenter for today, and that is Dr. Jeff Iliff. I see Jeff is sharing his screen. and he's going to talk a little bit about what happens when you sleep and how could that be good or not so good for your brain. Welcome to Jeff.
Thanks, Jürgen. Can you see my screen? You can see my screen okay?
Yes.
Very good. So as Jürgen said, my name is Jeff Iliff. I'm a professor in psychiatry and behavioral sciences and in neurology and part of the Northwest MIREC at the VA Puget Sound, where my lab is actually located. So I'm actually a pretty relatively recent addition. I was recruited up here from OHSU in Portland just around 3 years ago. So this morning, I'm going to be doing two different things. First, I'm going to be providing a high-level picture on one of the projects that we've been able to spin up here since coming up here about 3 years ago, related to sleep and the consequences of sleep disruption on brain health. And second, I'm going to be making a pretty shameless pitch for new collaborations. So here we go. So sleep is it's something we think a lot about. It's obviously a fundamental part of how the brain functions and how it maintains its health. We know that because when a person doesn't sleep well for either a night or a couple nights or a lot of nights in a row, we see impacts that are pretty measurable on decision-making, on memory, on attention, on motor coordination. All of these end up being impaired. We also know that chronic sleep disruption seems to be a key feature in a myriad of neurological and psychiatric conditions that range from Alzheimer's disease to Parkinson's, TB, traumatic brain injury, PTSD, headache, depression, and many more. So while we've long assumed that this sleep disruption is at the very least a feature of these conditions, more recent data suggests that this sleep disruption may actually be one of the factors driving either the development of or the persistence of the symptoms or the pathology underlying these diseases. So over the last 10 years or so, our research group has helped to define one of the basic physiological roles of sleep. So what we've done in a series of studies, first in animals and now more recently in humans, is to demonstrate that during sleep, the brain shifts into a kind of cleaning mode, where the fluid that surrounds the brain begins to move into and through brain tissue, clearing away waste that during the night, the waste that is accumulated through the course of the day's activity. So this brainwashing is generally believed at this point to underlie, at least in part, some of the restorative functions of sleep on cognition, and its impairment may underlie the development of some of these sleep-related neurological and psychiatric conditions. So if that's true, then improving sleep and improving this brain clearance may actually provide a novel way to approach either preventing or treating these kinds of sleep-related conditions. So in doing this, we're faced with two different key challenges as we approach these kinds of problems. So first, we have to develop ways to measure this waste clearance in the brain, so that in the human brain especially, so that we can detect when it is that it's not working. And second, we have to develop approaches that are safe, that can improve sleep and waste clearance to try to affect these disease outcomes. So the first of these challenges, let's see, this is actually, sorry, I'm having a quick little thing. I'm going to delete this, do this. Sorry about that. So the first of these problems is essentially a technical problem. So our studies in animals used MRI to measure this waste clearance from the brain by imaging the movement of tracers into the brain and out of the brains of rodents. In collaborative studies that are ongoing now, funded by the Department of Defense and by NASA, our imaging team has developed a similar approach to use MRI to measure the movement of an MRI contrast agent into and out of the human brain. That's what we show here in this top row here. However, an approach like this that uses a contrast agent is ultimately going to be hard to implement in larger clinical populations. So it's important for us to be able to develop non-invasive and contrast-free approaches to measuring this kind of waste clearance. So this is a step where support from the Garvey Institute, support that we're actually really thankful for, was critical for us. So through the Garvey Institute Innovation Grants Program, we received a pilot award that supported the studies in animals that helped us to develop and to validate a set of non-invasive MRI sequences that each capture sort of a different facet of this brain cleaning biology. So in work that was actually led by my collaborator, an incredibly talented MR physicist in the UW Department of Radiology, Dr. Swati Rane, our group can now use these cutting-edge MRI scans to map changes in the blood vessel network that organize this waste clearance. We can measure how quickly water and other molecules wash into and out of the brain, and we can detect how different oscillations in the brain tissue move fluid through the system. So these lower panels actually give a snapshot of one of these approaches, which is allowing us to measure long-distance fluid transport through the brain. So in short, we've developed a toolkit that allows us to readily measure this waste clearance process in the human brain. So to begin to tackle the second obstacle, figuring out how to enhance sleep and this associated waste clearance, we're just now embarking on the first of its kind collaborative study with partners at UNC Chapel Hill, OHSU down in Portland, Montana State University, and a company out of Eugene, Oregon that's called Brain Electrophysiology Labs, which we call BELL. So Bell has developed a device, which is sort of shown here on this study participant, which is essentially a headband with electrodes embedded in it that delivers low-level electrical stimulation to the parts of the brain that control deep sleep, so a phase of sleep called slow wave sleep. This electrical stimulation is light enough that you can't feel it and it doesn't wake you up. But in initial trials in humans, it appears to improve the amount of time that participants spend both in deep slow wave sleep, but also in REM sleep as well. So leveraging the imaging approaches that let us measure brain clearance, we're now going to test whether enhancement of sleep with this brain stimulation device improves waste clearance from the brain and could actually protect against the cognitive effects of sleep restriction and sleep deprivation. So this is a study that's funded by a new $4.3 million grant from Department of Defense, and will be one of the first of its kind to try to augment waste clearance during sleep as a way to improve brain function in humans. So where we're at today, in fact, at this moment right now, we're at this incredibly exciting time for how we think about the role of sleep in neurological and psychiatric conditions. We discovered this waste clearance process almost exactly 10 years ago. It'll be 10 years ago in August was when we published the first report. It's brand new biology. And so there's new discoveries in the space seemingly every single week that change how we think about it. Yet the work in leveraging what we're learning to begin to improve human disease is just starting right now as well. So there's opportunities literally just laying around waiting for the right team to pick them up and to run with them. So what we have now is a team. We have at least key pieces of that team. It's multidisciplinary, and it reflects the incredibly powerful collaboration that's possible at an institution that attracts some of the best and most creative folks around. It includes engineers, physicists, we have psychologists, psychiatrists, neurologists, and sleep physicians on our team, and of course, biologists with expertise in these processes. Our group, we're now regarded as one of the national leaders in studying this waste clearance in the human brain. But what we need now are subject matter experts and champions of different sleep-related conditions. So Parkinson's disease, depression, PTSD, migraine. There's a strong reason to suspect that targeting sleep and waste clearance may be helpful in these and other clinical settings. But what we need are partners with the right clinical and research expertise to connect with our team, to think through how this biology may connect with these conditions, and to develop clinical studies in patient populations. So we now have a couple of interesting techniques at our disposal. We have MRI sequences that can measure waste clearance in the human brain. We have a transcranial electrical stimulation paradigm that appears to improve slow wave and REM sleep in human participants. Other approaches to targeting sleep or waste clearance are just waiting to be evaluated though. So for example, does cognitive behavioral therapy targeting insomnia improve waste clearance? We don't know, no one's ever tried it. What about the new orexin antagonists that are coming out for the treatment of insomnia and narcolepsy? We don't know, no one's ever tried it. What about bright light therapy? No one's ever tried those. These are questions that are just waiting to be asked with the tools that we now have at our disposal. So as I mentioned, these are pretty exciting times in the field. The research in the space is moving fast. Our big question right now is who can we partner with who are either in our local research ecosystem or in an extended one to start to push some of this work out into other sleep-related conditions. So thanks for your attention. Glad to answer questions if there's time, if you have them. This is my email right here. If you would like to talk about this more, I would love to chat. Drop me an email and we can meet up or connect by Zoom.
Thank you, Jeff, for this fascinating introduction to your work and your team's work. It's amazing to think about, moving within 10 years of this understanding that our brains are essentially cleaning themselves while we sleep. And now to think about how can you use that understanding to really improve brain health. That's, I think, the opportunity we all have and that you have. And I appreciate that the Institute can help with this work. And I think it's another wonderful example of putting together, connecting the dots of an incredibly rich and talented environment that we have here and seeing what we can do to move things forward quickly. So thank you. If anybody has any questions, we have a few minutes. Anybody want to ask Jeff a question by chat? That's fine. Otherwise, you could definitely reach. I'd encourage you to reach out to him.
Very good. I think one note in lieu of a question, I'll simply extend my talk longer. This biology has been framed primarily over the last 10 years from the perspective of waste clearance, and from the perspective of things like amyloid and tau and synuclein, which aggregate in the setting of neurodegeneration. But the biology itself is very fundamental. It has to do with the performance and the behavior of soluble molecules in the brain interstitial compartment. So that's drug delivery and pharmacokinetics. That's that's regulating volume transmission. So the performance of neuromodulators in brain tissue. So in thinking through how this biology is relevant to other psychiatric diseases or conditions, I think it's important to not only think about clearing away big proteins that are hanging around, but it's also probably changing very global network level processes. And that's why we think that there's sort of an untapped space connected around like mood disorders, like depression or PTSD. So sleep meds like Z drugs due to waste. So the simple answer is we actually have no idea how sleep medications affect these processes. Part of it is because the work is relatively new, especially in humans. We know that at least in animals, blockade of central noradrenergic tone, such as with prazosin as an example, that's relevant in this department, seems to enhance this process. We have some preliminary data in humans that suggest that prazosin in humans doesn't improve this process. But in terms of other drugs that are used for the treatment of insomnia, whether Ambien or benzos or even something like Benadryl, we think that this biology is connected to different sleep stages. So K complexes that arise in N2 sleep and also slow wave activity in N3 sleep. So it probably will depend on the way that those drugs engage those processes.
Great.
There we go.
Jeff, I'm going to keep us on time. I want to thank you for a great presentation. I want to thank all of our speakers, all of our featured speakers this morning. I think what we heard is really it's a sampling of 4 of 24 projects that we've kicked off here in the last year and a half. And I think what you can see is we have tremendous potential to work together to really make a difference, in this vast set of disorders that affect our brains, our mental health, that cause us to live with addiction. And it's really exciting to see what we can do together over the next decade or so as we get this institute fully off the ground. So I want to thank again Mike and Lynn and the Garvey family for making this work possible through the Garvey Institute. And of course, thank all of you who are bringing your talent, your enthusiasm, your ideas to say, how do we make the most of this wonderful resource we now have? And then how do we leverage this resource and bring along others who share these interests, who might have a related interest? So as I said, there are a number of other areas that we could get into. We'd probably want to raise additional partners, raise additional funds, and that's a great thing we can all work on together. But I think it's great to have this sampling of what's possible in this environment in even a relatively short amount of time. So on that, what I'd like to do is thank all of you for joining us here for the last 2 hours to get a little bit of an introduction to what is this institute, what does it do, what can it do, what could it do. And we're going to wrap up this main session and take a little break. And then some of you are going to come back and do some specific breakout sessions. Those of you who are doing that, you have links, Zoom links for your particular breakout. We'll let you do that for about 45 minutes, and then we'll all come back together and we'll hear from each of the 5 breakout session leaders a little bit of an update of what you talked about in your sessions. Becky, do you want to add anything?
You should have received the Zoom link for the breakout main room through email, but I'm gonna stick it in the chat. So if you are participating in the breakout sessions that start at 11, the Zoom link is now in the chat for you.
And for those of you who are not joining us for the breakouts, thank you for joining us this morning. And please feel free to share any thoughts, any ideas, any observations you have, any suggestions you have for me, for the team, as we move this work forward. So thank you all. We're going to end this session, and we'll see some of you back in a few minutes in breakouts, and then in about 45 minutes, we'll all get back together and we'll hear some report outs. Thank you.